the last year, the theme has really been insert verb here at home. It's been working from home, learning from home, celebrating from home. So I guess I'd love to just kick off by hearing a little bit about, I think we've all become accustomed to this work-life balance idea, but I think we are all now in the new work-life integration phase of our life. So I would love to hear a little bit about how you've been navigating throughout this time.
Yeah, let's see. Work from home has definitely, it's gotten better over time. It was a bit of a challenge. I have two young children. And so, I jokingly say that if I could sum up my work from home experience, it would be that probably a couple of months into work from home, I was presenting to about 70 people on a call. And my youngest child, who just turned 3, so he was 2 at the time, was taking a nap on the couch behind me in my home office. And he woke up crying, and of course, unplanned. And so I picked him up as I was presenting, and he proceeded to pee all over me while I was presenting to about 70 people, without missing a beat. And then, I am fielding questions while I'm taking my 2-year-old potty in the bathroom. And it's all recorded in its glory, posted on Microsoft's sharing portal. So that just summarizes kind of my work from home experience, but it's been, definitely a learning curve. And I think, surprisingly, I find myself working more when I work from home. So the idea of saving time in that commute doesn't exist. But it is nice to be able to kind of walk away from my computer when I'm done at the end of the day and walk downstairs and see my kids.
Definitely relate to that. I think for me, the silver lining of working from home has been, I've gotten to see a lot of my coworkers' kids grow up. I had a friend who, he was out on paternity up until the week we started working from home. So we hadn't seen him in person. And I've been watching his daughter, she sometimes joins some of our team calls. And it's been just really great to kind of, that's like the ray of light in all of this has kind of been, the people aspect. And I think that's something that's really helped is, even if we're virtual, like we're real humans on the other end of it. So I think it's definitely helped humanize that. I think we're all a little tired of, video calls, but at the same time, it's, gives you a reason to do your hair in the morning.
No, absolutely. I think the key, in supporting kind of teams and people as they work from home is to normalize the fact that at home means we have kids and we have dogs and, we have pets and there's, external factors. And so I really encouraged my team to stop apologizing when their kid, is crying in the background or when a dog barks because somebody showed up at the door. It's not about having to say, I'm sorry. It's about accepting the new normal. And so, part of that is normalizing that experience.
100%. Yeah. I was on a call, I think it was 2 days ago, and my doorbell rang, which it was a package delivery, but I wasn't expecting it. I just jumped on basically into the screen. They were like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm so sorry. I'm just not used to that." But no,
Absolutely.
so excited to chat with you today. I know we want to talk a little bit about, all the learnings. I think we can't really look forward without looking back at this past year and really how it's impacted, how we do business, like how consumers shop, like how we as humans are really, interacting in our new normal. But I do kind of want to take a look back and, like I said, we can't look forward without looking back at, the pandemic. And I really would like to dive into, what Microsoft did throughout the pandemic to really help frontline workers and kind of the background behind that.
Yeah, I think Microsoft is uniquely positioned, given the fact that much of what we do at Microsoft is enable remote work, remote productivity, mobile productivity, remote collaboration, remote development. So all of the products really that Microsoft, produces in the B2B space is really along those lines, because of, the target audience that we have. So the idea that development can happen anywhere. And so I think Microsoft was uniquely positioned to be a, source for people to navigate kind of the new normal as a result of the pandemic. And so I think, Microsoft's positioning, kind of the products that Microsoft already had, the way in which we were speaking to our customers, existed, pre-pandemic. But I think more specifically in terms of how Microsoft was really supporting our customers and the community, was done in a number of ways. There was encouragement from leadership for Microsoft employees to volunteer at mass vaccination sites. Microsoft was and is powering dashboards that are available to the public, where you can drill into COVID-19 data, look at individual counties, states, countries, across the globe, their progress to zero, vaccination rates, where you can go to get vaccinated. And so Microsoft, I think, did a number of things on the spectrum to really enable not only their employees, but their customers, and really, lean into the kind of the mission statement that Microsoft has, which is empowering every person on the planet to achieve more. And so really leaning into every aspect of that during the pandemic.
100%. Yeah, I think information is power. And I think, throughout this whole process, we've all been navigating it together, whether it's as humans, as employees, as parents, as, partners. I think just understanding what's going on has been key. So kudos to you all for helping with that. I think I'd love to touch on, you mentioned like the demand for connectivity. I think, with, in person, how we work together, right? So we, they're gone were the days of, huddling in a conference room doing whiteboarding, right? So how were we kind of shifting that to digital? I think also with the huge influx of student learning and remote learning, remote work, all that good stuff. How has the demand for connectivity impacted, Microsoft's either approach or overall, focus for the year?
Yeah, so I would say that, we, similar to a lot of other companies kind of during this time, our approach has evolved. And so we've kind of learned, as we've kind of gone throughout this process. And I think, what we did at the beginning is not necessarily applicable to what we're doing now. When I think about kind of the initial time period of adapting kind of to the economic impact that COVID was having, understanding kind of the new world, right? The new normal from the pandemic. When we approached it originally, it was about kind of resilience. And so we really took on, concept of resilience and how does Microsoft, help our customers be more resilient in this new normal. And, whether or not that's through, Microsoft solutions or Microsoft products or through data, right? Empowering people with data. We, did everything from small things within our marketing campaigns, like, acknowledging some of our target audiences and some of our industries and saying, hey, is marketing and media appropriate, to be doing right now in, industries that are heavily impacted, retail, manufacturing, where businesses are fully closed during that time. I think other things that we did were look at our creative representation and say, do we have a bunch of people, grouped together in office space touching, how can we best represent kind of the new state, of the economic environment, of the workspace. And so we made some of those small changes, but I think over time, we're getting past that concept of resilience where people are no longer resilient per se. They are functioning in the new normal, and this is the new normal. And so it's more so about how can we help you be successful in the new normal versus being resilient in a certain period of time that at that time seemed like a truncated, moment in time. It didn't seem like it was going to continue forever. And I think as things have evolved and we've realized that there's going to be lasting impact on how we do business, how we operate, where we operate, we've really moved into how can Microsoft's products and solutions empower you and enable you to do that for what fits in your world, right? Or in your life.
Yeah, definitely. I think, being a B2B company ourselves, I think, providing value to our customers and our clients during this time. So I think, again, we were all kind of going through this together. So in that regard, I guess, how has your messaging changed? Like, is that something that has changed temporarily, and has that impacted, I guess, your future messaging strategy?
As far as how our messaging has changed, it's evolved again, very similarly, where, initially I would say the messaging was about, how can we help? How can we serve this particular moment in time in this thing that is unique to right now? And I think over time we've evolved to say, how can we meet you where you are? How can we service what you need? Because what you need is different for every person, given kind of the impact, right, of the pandemic has hit everybody very differently. Everybody internalizes that differently. How we do work is different. How we engage and collaborate with our coworkers is different. And so I think the idea from being resilient and helping for a, shortened period of time to saying, hey, how can Microsoft meet you where you are? How can,
Mm-hmm.
our products and services enable you to do what is right for you right now? And hopefully then continuing that new normal into the future.
Definitely. And have your audience changed? Like who you're going after, has that changed in any way throughout this time?
It actually hasn't tremendously. And that's really because when you think about the core audience for Microsoft in a B2B space, we're really focused on, empowering remote development and, enabling remote development. And remote development was actually a thing long before the pandemic. And so I think while the pandemic forced a lot of people's hands, the concept of remote development and Microsoft is, having products and services that enable that remote development allowed us to continue that messaging, to continue that priority throughout the pandemic, which didn't necessarily change to who we were going after and essentially how we were speaking to them.
Awesome. And just, I guess, taking a look back, since you guys were uniquely positioned, I think, to kind of, before, this craziness ensued, to weather the storm, like has the last year at all impacted your product roadmaps? Has it sped anything up? Has it moved anything to the back burner? How has it changed really your product roadmap runway?
Yeah, so I would say that, in terms of how our product has changed and evolved, I think, there are absolutely things that have impacted it, whether or not that I can say very specifically this one thing, from the pandemic impacted this particular change in the product. I don't think I could speak to that, specifically, because there's so many things that have been taken into account, right, over the last year. And so, I would say that yes, absolutely. Are we thinking about things in a slightly different way? Are we trying to, recognize and address how people are doing work now, maybe versus how they were doing work previously, or the product life cycle of where we thought we were at one point versus another? Absolutely. The pandemic is taking those types of things into account, but I don't know that I could say very specifically we have drastically changed our go-to-market approach because of the pandemic. Simply, again, because we were enabling that type of engagement and productivity prior to the pandemic. And so it was something that we could just continued to foster and develop throughout the last year.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, I think another thing you and I chatted about was bridging this disability divide. So I'd love to maybe chat a little bit about that and dive into, how that incorporates into your product roadmap and into the products you do.
Yeah, accessibility and diversity and inclusion are, top priorities for Microsoft. And, it's really wonderful to work for a company that not only, commits to the kind of external aspects of accessibility, diversity, and inclusion, but really represents that internally as well. And so, everything that my team does is accessible. So when we think specifically about our marketing efforts and the idea that marketing, and what we do is pushing ourselves kind of in front of people, right? We are meeting our customers, we are showing up and we're saying, hey, think about Microsoft as a solution, potentially before they even realize that they have a problem that needs to be solved, or before they thought that Microsoft could be that solution. And if we're there to some extent pushing ourselves, right, and introducing ourselves to somebody, maybe potentially before they realize they're ready, it is doing us a disservice if we're not making sure that that content, that creative, that marketing activity and engagement is accessible. And so, it doesn't make any sense for us to say that we are empowering, right, every person on the planet to achieve more if we're excluding certain people, right, from that mission statement. And so for us, accessibility is a massive part of what we do, both in terms of our marketing, but also from a product standpoint. So when you think about it on the consumer side, which, I don't obviously work on, I work in the B2B space, but from our, Xbox controllers and ensuring that our Xbox controllers are accessible from a disability standpoint, Microsoft is really living and breathing that, both in terms of our external marketing, but our products, and even what we do internally and how we approach, internal documentation, the way that we, present things internally is all based on accessibility standards that, are better than what are, so Microsoft's accessibility standards are actually better than what we, adhere to from an internet accessibility kind of standard that is set across the industry.
What kind of, I guess, advice would you give to a company who maybe hasn't done as much as maybe Microsoft has so far to get started. I think it can be really overwhelming, things from, knowing which font size to use, which font type to use, what colors are accessible. I guess, what are some tips you'd give for someone who'd like to get started with that?
Yeah. So there's actually tools that exist where you can do accessibility checks, right, on marketing, like media banners or things like that, pieces of content. So you can go online. There's a tool called FastPass, and you can go and use it and check out whether or not your content or your ad or something that you're doing, from a marketing standpoint is accessible. Website, whether or not what you've built is accessible, but it also gives you the basic generalities of accessibility standards. So it'll talk about contrast ratios in terms of colors. It'll talk about alt text for images. It'll talk about, the size of the font. So there's a number of things that are just basic guidelines that are available and free tools that you can leverage that will help, do basic checks from an accessibility standpoint. And that's definitely where I suggest starting.
Awesome. Taking, I guess, a step back at usability and inclusion, I know you also oversee kind of global marketing campaigns and such for your company. So I guess, how has like the global impact of the pandemic, and even just prior to that, like the global localities, like has localization efforts been a part of your marketing plays?
Yeah, I think looking at it initially from a pandemic standpoint, we're cognizant of what's going on in any particular market. And so not only do we look at our global approach and understand kind of where we are globally, but we look at individual market, right, nuances, and we decide on a market by market basis whether or not what we're doing is applicable or kind of the right thing to do in that market. But overall, if we take a step back and kind of not thinking about the pandemic, we actually do think about kind of market nuances in the way we approach each individual market in a very different way. To ensure that we're really focused on that concept of kind of diversity and inclusion. And so we want diverse representation within our lifestyle photography, right? We want to understand that disabilities can be both, seen and unseen. We want to make sure that when we are running in global markets that we're accounting for, the geopolitical aspects of that country and how we are representing the lifestyle imagery, right, that we may have in our marketing, so that it's appropriate for the geopolitical, space of that country. And so those are things that we think about, all the time when we are putting together marketing. And so it's very customized to where we are going and how we're messaging.
Awesome. I guess taking a step back and just, considering our audience in the virtual room today, I think you've, again, said, Microsoft was uniquely positioned for success at the beginning of this because of the digital nature, connectivity, and some of the roadmaps that you already had in play. But I guess, what advice would you give to maybe some companies who weren't as, well prepared? I mean, no one could have expected what was to come, to kind of weather the storm as we kind of move into this recovery phase.
Yeah, I definitely would say that one of the core successes that we found in terms of keeping kind of our marketing going, but also grounded, is, again, to meet our customers where they are, but think about what our customers' needs are in the moment. And so that may mean that your product messaging and positioning, right, may need to shift slightly. So it doesn't mean that your product itself can't continue to serve the need, but your messaging and positioning may need to shift because the value, right, proposition of your product in the current environment may be different. And so the benefit that you can bring kind of currently in a pandemic world versus a non-pandemic world may be slightly different. And so it's really about how you position. It's about how you message and about how you showcase the solution that you can bring to a potential customer's problem in a unique way. And so, I think that is really the kind of crux of success in marketing kind of in our current economic space, is about how do you shift and think about that messaging so it's speaking in a relevant way to the current situation versus trying to completely change what you're doing. I think customers see through that, right? They want to have a real conversation. They want to understand, the benefits, but they also want to, as advertisers, they want us to understand that right now, example, big companies may not be looking to do massive software overhauls or buy big software products, right? They're trying to keep the lights on. And so being cognizant of, what products and services match kind of the needs of our customers right now, I think, and is the important part of marketing.
And what, I guess, key data points are you looking at to help inform your own strategies?
Yeah, I mean, we look at everything. Obviously, we look at our internal data, from a Microsoft standpoint. So we're looking at signals from our sellers. We're understanding conversations that our sellers are having with customers. We're looking at sales data, all of the the obvious things that we look at from an internal standpoint. But we're also looking externally. We're looking at trends in the industries. We're looking to understand how the industries are evolving, what the needs of those industries are and how they're unique now versus maybe in the future, or how they have historically been. And so I think that that's done a lot of informing around, what sort of ways in which we market, what we market, how we market. So knowing uniquely where we have a product that may service, the healthcare industry, and understanding kind of the concept of frontline workers, where are they in their journey right through the pandemic compared to, a retail shop or compared to a software company. And so understanding that there's nuance from an industry basis and looking at how industries are recovering, but also how the locales where they are recovering are all things that we factor into our marketing.
And asking for maybe all the vendors in the room, but how can vendors, help be part of like that data? Like what kind of value can they add besides, just helping with, media executions and things like that? Like what are you looking to from your vendors to kind of help support and inform you?
Yeah, I think we're looking for, from our vendors, very specifically insights, right? I think data is power, and, data informs the decisions that we make. And so, to some extent, how do we democratize the data that we are all gathering from the pandemic? How do we understand the trends? How do we understand, what people are doing in the market, how particular industries are recovering, how new needs might be forming. And so I think, if I had to say, how can our partners help us? I think it's, being uniquely positioned to see those trends more holistically, than I think somebody in my position might, right? I'm solely focused on one particular thing. And so, I might not see some of the broader, right, macro trends that are happening right across the space that maybe a vendor and a partner might see, because of their unique ability to look left to right across many different industries, companies and products.
100%. I think a trend we saw with some of our clients was, a little more reactive marketing plans. I think we were all, kind of dipping our toes in the water and figuring this out together. So how has that impacted, your marketing roadmaps? Like, are you kind of following that same trend where maybe you were a little more reactive in the last couple of months, but now that, there's sunlight at the horizon, like, are you able to plan longer lead times, or how is that, have you always had shorter sprint times? How has that kind of worked?
Yeah. So I would say that, even Microsoft, I think, you'd probably be hard pressed to find a marketer who would say over the last year that they felt front-footed. I would say that I spent most of last year being very reactive, but I don't know that in this context, reactive is bad. I actually think reactive is good when you take the lead, or when you let kind of what is happening right in the marketplace, in your location, in your industry, drive the decisions that you make, then you know that you're doing what is right for your customers, where you could absolutely, take a risk and try to be a bit more front-footed, and that risk can pay off, but that risk could also, not pretty significantly. And so there could be some major fallout from, taking that risk. And so to me, I know we always say as marketers that it's never good to be, to be reactive and reactionary, but I think I would say this last year is unique to the fact that being reactive for me was good. It was fine. It was, the right thing to do because it enabled us to have more real conversations with our customers. I think going forward, as things start to change and, there's some semblance of normal, whether or not that's a new normal or, letting kind of the old us start to filter back in. I think you could probably be a bit more front-footed in terms of, your marketing. You can try to, forecast and stay on top of what you think the needs of your customers might be. But I don't know that that's necessarily changed our marketing approach, simply because I think if we think about going back to a state of where we maybe previously were with some slight tweaks, I think it's safe to say is what you were doing previously was working doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? As we go forward. And so I think it's important to start with a baseline, start with knowing what works, test and learn, and then iterate from your baseline from there versus trying to start completely over. Because I think at this point, we're working towards a time where, we're getting back to what that normal was, and that small tweaks are going to be our future versus kind of upheaval of how we've worked historically.
I agree. Yeah, I think, being a marketer myself, I think, seasonal trends and things that, it's like, oh, this tends to happen around this time, that went out the window last year. I think we were all kind of learning together. And I think, being more relevant. And I think, looking at for example, like a Mother's Day this year that's coming up, right? I'm not looking at Mother's Day last year. That was an anomaly. So, taking a step back, what does Q1 look like, and how is that shaping, and how can I use that information to, add value to our clients in terms of like, here are our best practice, here are our recommendations. I agree. I think, I did used to look at reactive as, being late to the party, but I think, if you're too proactive, it might be irrelevant by the time that rolls around. So I 100% agree that it's a balance of kind of, real time historical knowledge, kind of being able to anticipate what's to come next. On that note, I guess, what trends or, how do you think your industry in particular is going to be shaped by, learnings this past year?
Great question. I would say that, for me personally, some of the learnings has definitely been about, what does it take to work from home? What does it take to stay connected to my team? I would say, what does it take to still be a good manager, right? When you're not seeing your team on a day-to-day basis, especially a manager that, like, for me, one of the things that I love is to sit in a room and to whiteboard something out. And, when I can't do that, how do I brainstorm? How do I stay connected? How do we think about pushing the needle, right? And so how do we start to say, I want to be more front-footed in a few of these areas, versus that reaction area, kind of approach that we've taken for the last year. And so for me, I would say that it's leveraging the tools, right, that you have. And so for me, it's about leveraging kind of the whiteboard tool that exists in our teams, right? So that I'm able to still whiteboard and still draw out. I think it's about turning on your video, sometimes, not necessarily all the time. I believe that turning on your video is a diversity and it's an inclusive behavior, right? It allows, somebody to look at you, to understand how their words are impacting you. And so I think turning on your video once in a while, and realizing that it's okay to still be wearing pajamas, and having that one-on-one conversation with one of your employees. So enabling the tools that you have, at your disposal to keep those connections, I think is an important aspect of kind of evolving and growing. Microsoft is not going back to work in person, until at least September. And so we've still got a number more months, on our work from home journey. And so I think about myself, right? I think about how I'm reacting, how I'm coping, what I'm using and what I'm doing. And I think about other people in similar situations and what is it that I need? And how then could I take what I potentially might need as something that could be of service to somebody else?
Definitely. Yeah. We've, our marketing team, we've kind of had to reassess how we do brainstorming. I think, the good side about this is, we have been able to kind of expand our team, and not everybody needs to be in the same space, because, where you are locally doesn't really matter. And I think that really opens up a bigger talent pool. And I think, if we're talking about inclusivity, I think that's a big barrier often is, do you live in the big city, and pay these city taxes and have to, deal with all that? Or, can you get the same amount of work or even more done? I think, having employees, coworkers of mine who are flexible with their time. I'm West Coast based. majority of my team is East Coast, but there are flexibilities. They're like, great, I don't have to have a meeting with you until 11 a.m. my time, right? 8 a.m.
Right.
mine. And I'm like, that's great. And I'm like, I know I'm not going to have meetings after 2, but we are a global company. We have teammates in India, teammates in Japan. So I think, it really opens the door. And I think we've been very lucky at GroundTruth that, folks are so willing to kind of be flexible with their time and understanding, people are juggling a lot of things, family time. I think grocery shopping was like a whole nother task this year. I think, it's a little thing. So 100% agree. I think just communication has been key.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have seen a ton of questions come in, so I'm going to just pause my line of questioning and maybe dive into some of these. All right. Let's see. Let's start off with, has the crisis forced modifications to short, mid, long-term goals and how you measure success based on changes in consumer behavior?
Yes and no. So I would say absolutely that it has changed some of the ways in which we do forecasting. And that is because there are different burdens that are placed on our resourcing. And so when you think about compute resourcing, for example, and or spinning up a virtual desktop or a virtual machine in a new remote environment, so many more people are doing that. And so that's a new burden, right? Whereas normally we would be spreading out some of that compute resourcing, in a more generalized way. I think that the result of the pandemic created an influx in demand that we needed to account for and didn't account for fast enough in some instances. And so that created a burden, right, on our customers, but also influenced some of our forecasting, influenced some of our, ability to kind of evolve and grow in the way that we had originally planned, because we spent a lot of that time kind of, addressing issues that had come up as a result of the pandemic that, we hadn't previously experienced. And so I would say no company, is unique to, riding through this storm perfectly. And so Microsoft, included, and our ability, I think, to recognize, learn, grow, and fix in a quick manner was really what set us apart to being, a service to our customers. But yes, absolutely, those types of things impacted, our forecasting, our roadmaps, our ability to prioritize growth, right, where we're back fixing just basic aspects of the product.
Got it. And if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. If you have questions for Anika. Another question, how have you shifted your data strategy in the past few months? I think it's slightly related to the question you just answered, but.
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends on what you mean exactly by data strategy. I would say that when it comes to kind of the role that I have at Microsoft is really about providing signals for our sellers. So it's aggregating marketing signals, right? Providing those signals to our sellers so that they have more robust conversations with either current customers in an upsell cross-sell motion or, net new customers. And so we leverage machine learned models and propensity models, obviously, anywhere we can. And so the idea is that your machine learned model and your propensity model learns and grows over time, and it's an organic thing. And so I think absolutely did the change from the pandemic and the shift in customer behaviors, the way that they both buy and utilize our products, but also how they engage with marketing activities, evolved and grew. It was very organic. But because we have those machine learned models, those propensity models that enable us to identify sales opportunities, those models evolved and grew, right, as things changed. And so, yes, we accounted for, changes in data in that way. I don't know that we took a very we didn't do necessarily a manual approach where we revisited, right, a subset of data and said, what are some of the things that we might look at in a different way as a result of the pandemic, simply because I don't know that we ever felt solid enough with the trends during the pandemic that we've ever felt like once we had the actionable insight from a manual data analysis that we would be able to actually take that and make it actionable in the future, simply because by the time that happened, we felt we were evolving and growing and potentially past any insight that we may have learned in the first place. So I absolutely think in ways in which data is machine learned, it's part of a model, that it evolved and grew. I don't know that we took on doing manual data analysis against particular moments in time, simply because we didn't feel confident with kind of the the marketplace not continuing to evolve and grow.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we're all, love to just hit that refresh button on a dashboard. Just kind of have like, here's your real time, and I know that requires an amazing amount of coordination between, different plugins and all that. We have a question from Paulo in Brazil. His question is about the main changes you expect to see in the consumer relationship management after this crisis.
Yeah. So, I think it's an interesting question, probably one I will tell you I'm less equipped to answer, simply because I can tell you how I think about, right, CRMs and, how we use a CRM system kind of in the commercial ecosystem, but because I'm not actually using it myself, from a tool standpoint, I'm thinking about how another customer might use it for themselves. I think is more so how I would approach this. I think that, looking at, how you are engaging with your customers, how you're re-engaging with your customers and managing kind of your customer database, is likely different now, right? Because whereas there was historical probably patterns of behavior. So whether or not, you're in a retail space and people are showing up, and you have high kind of in-person, right, shopping experience times, that, and you would send out an email, right, in a B2C environment, and that would drive, an increase of traffic and thus an increase of sales. I don't know that, right, that's happening these days. And, I think other aspects of that are, if you are trying to meet your customer where they are, where is your customer right now? And so I think having aspects of a CRM that helps you start to redefine what these new patterns of behavior are, I think is an important aspect of kind of understanding your customer base, knowing when is the right time to market to that customer. The old adage of, right message, right time, right space, to some extent still applies. And so I think that there's kind of that evolution, but I'm not personally in a CRM system, on a regular basis. And so I'm not necessarily thinking about how I specifically would manage a customer subset, but definitely thinking about it more so along the lines of how another commercial entity might be evolving their marketing strategies and managing their customer database, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think so. I think, looking at a consumer journey, at a customer journey, like are these temporary trends? Like, is, your normal funnels that might have been pre-built, I think to kind of drive in additional factors like, is this a temporary change? Like, is this person actually interested? Is this like a temporary move? So many more variables. The next question, I love this question. How have you kept your team engaged and motivated during the pandemic? Are there any strategies you recommend to other marketing leaders?
Yeah. So I've done a number of things. And I did this in trial and error. So I will tell you that I started out and tried a few things that did not work. And so it is about kind of trying and learning and getting feedback from your team and really being open to feedback from the people that, are on your team and how they work best and, what makes them the most comfortable. Because ultimately I found that people are much more apt to engage the more comfortable that they are. And so I started out the pandemic by saying, hey, we're going to schedule, a couple of meetings, maybe once a month where the team comes together, you could do a happy hour or you could do a game. And I found that it was really difficult to get people to really want to actively participate or actively engage. And what I realized is that at the end of the day, when we sit at our computers all day long, you haven't gotten up. And, you just kind of want to be able to walk away from work because there's been that blurring of the line between kind of work and personal. I found that adding in another meeting was the last thing anybody wanted. And so what I've actually ended up doing and kind of shifted over time is that I always try to spend about 5 minutes either at the beginning or an end of the meeting, either with my team or, in small group settings where we're just having more personalized conversations. And so I'm checking in, I'm saying, hi, how are you? What's going on? Did you, do anything interesting this morning when you walked from your bedroom to the kitchen to your home office? What location are you going to sit in today, over the weekend for, those types of things. So, kind of making it a bit more fun, but not scheduling additional meetings. And I found that kind of helped everybody feel a bit more comfortable, but also feeling less pressure, like there was just yet another thing, on their plate. Walking one-on-ones, I have found to be amazing. And so I really encourage my team to say, hey, do you have anything that requires me to look at my computer screen, for this one-on-one? If not, let's both go outside, walk around the block a few times while we're engaging. It helps push your team to kind of get out of the office, get out of sitting, enjoy the outside. So I think little things I have found much more impactful, and my team has appreciated more as a leader, from me as a leader, than trying to schedule happy hours or trying to, invent kind of these larger connection points. It's definitely more organic the smaller that you do it, but the more frequently you can do it.
Yeah, I've employed similar types of ideas. I think, the chit chat, that you used to have in a conference room doesn't really happen, because you want to be respectful of people's time. So, I'd often start a meeting and dive right into like the agenda and what I wanted to cover. And I think, again, going back to like the human side of it, is like, hi, how are you? Like, did you eat breakfast today? Like, just the basic types of things.
I think one other thing I would recommend is also finding something that's relevant to the work that you do, but isn't actually about work. So an example is, the TEDx talk, the Start with the Why, I think is the name. It's like the most watched TEDx talk. It's very good if you haven't seen it. But I had my team watch it. It's only like 20 minutes. And then we had a rich discussion about, starting with the why. Where do we see it done well at Microsoft? Where do we see it not done well? How do we see it as, it relates to our customers, but also how do we see it as it relates to our internal kind of structure, our internal engagements? And so there was no actions. There was no expectation that they took it anywhere. There was no expectation that they did anything afterwards. It was just a short video with a rich discussion that was relevant to kind of what we do as marketers, but without an expectation of additional work. And so the team found it really engaging, had a rich discussion, had a great discussion, things that they have then subsequently thought about, right, in other aspects of their work, but there wasn't any sort of expectation across the board that it became anything more than what it was. And so I think some of those things are great ways to, to make things relevant to what you do, but also, not add work to your team's plate.
I love that. Yeah, building it in, and as opposed to building on top of, all the additional things folks have to focus on. I think we have time for one last question. So sure. This is similar to, I guess, the work-life balance. I guess a lot of us have questions on how to do it right. How have you found balance between work and personal life while working from home?
Yeah, I have to be totally honest. I have not. I suck at it. And so I am the worst possible person to be giving advice on this subject. I would say that, it is something that I clearly need to work on. I do not do a great job of it, because I'll, get pinged from somebody and I'm like, oh, I could just run upstairs really quick to my office and fire off that email. And so I've had to create some artificial boundaries for myself so that I can, do a better job of creating that separation. And so one of the things that I actually do is I turn off the notifications on my phone. And so I have the email and I have Teams on my phone, right? We're mobile productivity at Microsoft. We're all about it. But I turn off the notifications when I am done for the day. And so I'm actually not getting those pings, right? Doesn't mean that people aren't emailing me, but I feel like I have less compulsion to answer them. So that's one little trick that I would recommend.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anika. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Great conversation. I really loved that last part about turning off your notifications. It definitely helps you to like focus on being present, in the evenings. And I find I get less anxiety.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. When my 3-year-old is mimicking me, I'm mommy, and pretending to hold a phone, I knew it was time.
A good tip on that, one of my coworkers, so I have a work phone and I have a personal phone because in a prior job I was on call. So I like to keep them separate, but a coworker of mine moves all of his work apps to a second screen. And so when it's work hours are done, he just slides the screen. And so his default is like his primary. And that way you're not tempted. I think it is very easy to kind of, slide back into like, let me just respond to this one thing, or let me get ahead of this one thing. But that was a great tip.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's really good. Well, thank you both for being here again. We
of course.
appreciate it. Yeah. And hopefully you'll come back again soon.
Absolutely. Anytime. You guys never have to ask me. I'm clearly more than willing to just keep talking. So,
okay. Noted. There are lots of people listening. Brand Innovators is like, oh, really? Okay. We'll have you back.
Great.
Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you again.
Thanks everybody so much. It was great.
Bye.
Have a
Thanks
great
so much.
day. All right. So, the show is close to